Good afternoon. A rousing welcome. Great. All right, I'm Andy Atkins. I'm with BTS, and in case any of you are disappointed, that is not the Korean boy band. BTS is an international leadership consultancy. We have offices in 24 different countries, and we focus on the people side of strategy. What do I mean by that? It's how do you help people in your organization engage, align, commit to strategic changes. And that's where we focus our time. And you can imagine, in that context, trust becomes an important aspect of looking at things. In terms of trust, I've been researching trust for about 15 years. And I was fortunate enough a few years ago to be named one of the top 100 thought leaders on workplace trust. So I'm going to share some of the perspectives that I've explored in that period of time with you in the next few minutes. And I want to start by forewarning you that I'm going to put you to work throughout the next half hour. You're not just going to sit there and listen. I'm going to give you a chance to experience some of what the insights that we've gotten about trust actually feel like and how you experience them. But we're going to ease into that by letting you think about another situation around trust, and that's the situation you see pictured up here. Got a couple of aerialists. Some of you may recognize this as a trapeze, and if so, you'll know that there are at least two people involved in a trapeze act. One of them, the one who's swooping down, is called the flyer. The one who's dangling by his knees is called the catcher. So here's where I'm going to put you to work first. Quick show of hands. How many of you think that the flyer has to have a high degree of trust? Okay. Now let's flip it around. How many of you think the catcher has to have a high degree of trust? Okay. One more question. And this one isn't a show of hands, it's actually voting with your thumb. How do you vote with your thumb? That's agree, that's maybe, that's no. Okay? So, voting with your thumb, how important is trust to the success of the aerialists? Okay. Now, keeping your thumbs up here for a second, because we're seeing nothing but thumbs up here, how important is trust to your organization? Oh, good. No thumbs went this way. That's a good thing. All right. Well, let's look at how important trust is to a lot of other organizations. And to do this, I'm going to give you a chance to guess at some numbers here. And the first thing we're going to look at is the number 74. Anybody have a guess about what 74 means? 74% is? Well, 74%, just to tip it for you so you get a sense of how we play this game, is actually how much a lack of trust in an organization drives stress. So a lack of trust can contribute to stress in 74% of the organization. Or conversely, the presence of trust can decrease stress by 74%. Let's look at another one. 106%. 106%. That's the incremental increase in energy that people feel at work when they're working in a high-trust environment. They feel more than twice as energetic when there's high trust. Third one, 40%. Any guesses? Decrease in burnout. High trust decreases burnout 40% in organizations. 76%. Increase in engagement. Last couple. 13%. Decrease in the number of sick days people take in a high-trust organization. And finally, we have 50%. That's the increase in productivity when there's high trust. These numbers come from research by a fellow named Paul Zak, who is a very, very influential thinker in the area of trust and outstanding research that he's done. But the key point for me here is that trust matters. This is not a nice to have. It actually translates into business results that matter for you. So, now that we've talked about trust in abstract, let's get specific, because what we're going to do in the course of the next 25 minutes or so is actually tear apart what does trust actually require. And the first thing that I'm going to say about trust is that trust is not ice cream, but we're going to use ice cream to describe it. Trust comes in two different flavors. One of those flavors, in this case chocolate, I guess, is relational trust. Relational trust is about the feeling of connection that you have to someone else. It's that, as Duncan was talking about, the connected aspect of it. It's that feeling that I have something in common with this person, or I feel some kind of a bond with this person. There's a second kind of trust called transactional trust. We're going to get to transactional trust in a few minutes, but the key distinction here is if the first kind of trust is really emotional, is a matter of that feeling of connection that I have, transactional trust is much more cerebral. It's much more of a thought-based trust. And both of these factor in. So, I said I was going to put you to work, and I'm going to invite you to look at your person sitting next to you, what we call the PSN. That's a technical term. That's the person sitting next to you. And over the course of the next probably 15 minutes or so as we're together, you're going to have the opportunity to learn something and experiment a little bit with your PSN, with your partner, okay? So everybody quickly lock eyes with your PSN so you know who they are. Everybody got somebody that they can work with? Okay, you two are going to work together? All right. All right. So now, here's what we're going to do. Relational trust, as I said, is a matter of connection. Oh, this is going to be fun. Okay. It's a matter of connection. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an opportunity to learn something about your PSN. Okay? I'm going to give you a chance to learn something. But I'm going to tell you specifically what I want you to learn about each other. Okay? So this is the way this is going to work. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. And I'm going to try to interrupt you at the end of 3 minutes. I'm going to beg that you come along with me on this one. But I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. That's about 1.5 minutes for each one of you. What you're going to do is one of you is going to share some information with the other one. I'm going to tell you what information I want you to share. The job that the other person has is just to listen. If you want to ask a question to learn a little bit more, that's fine. But this is not a dialogue. You're just listening to try and experience what is it like to listen to this person share with me. And then in about 1.5 minutes, I'm going to have you, reverse roles. So then the other person, the person who was listening, is now going to share, and the person who was speaking is going to listen. And when we finish, I'm going to give you a chance to think about what that experience is. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The thing I want you to share is the answer to 3 questions. What do you love? What do you hope? And what do you fear? What do you love? What do you hope? What do you fear? The clock's ticking. You got 1.5 minutes, and then you're going to switch roles. Go for it. Okay, that's a minute and a half. Change roles now. If you were sharing, now you're listening. If you were listening, now you're sharing. Okay, time is up. Wrap up what you're saying. Finish the conversation. All right. Now, I'm noticing a reluctance to quiet down, which is maybe a good thing, but that's all right. And the reason that I say that that's maybe a good thing is that if you're reluctant to end the conversation, something tells me you found some value in that conversation. You found it interesting. So what I'd like you to do is to reflect on that experience. You've had two experiences here. One of them telling somebody something that was kind of personal about yourself. And the other was the experience of listening to it. So you had both experiences. So what we're going to reflect on are these three questions. What is it that you noticed? What did it feel like to listen? And what did it feel like to tell? So think for a second about your own experience here. And we're going to use a quick show of hands to, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here. So first of all, anybody, as you're thinking about this first question of what did you notice, anybody want to just volunteer something that you noticed happened during the conversation? Any takers? Okay. Let me ask you this question. How many of you, when you saw these three words up here, said, uh-oh, I'm not feeling really comfortable about this? All right, we got a few honest hands up there. All right. Not so sure you wanted to do that. Okay? So you might have felt something of a feeling of dread or reluctance to show that kind of vulnerability to someone else. Because I asked you to share some things that are kind of vulnerable. Okay? Where sharing that may not have been the most comfortable thing you could have done. And we often have a reluctance to share things that aren't necessarily in the public domain, or aren't necessarily things that we normally would share with someone else. Now, in this case, it was very personal. But in a business environment, it may be actually how you're feeling about a change. How you're feeling about a change, not just why it's a good thing to do. So some of you felt a little reluctant to say that. Here's the other question. I want you to think about the experience of listening to someone say that. Again, quick show of hands. For how many of you, as you listen to the other person share that information, did you have a feeling of an increase in connection to that other person? A lot of hands went up. and increasing connection. That's the interesting thing about relational trust. Relational trust is about how do you establish connection. And one of the ways that we establish connection is by being open with other people, by being authentic, by being vulnerable, by sharing openly, not violating confidences, not sharing information you're not supposed to share, but it may be a matter of being a little bit more yourself, a little bit more real with people to give them a better sense of who you are. And there's a reason that this works. And the reason comes down to what do these three things have in common? Babies, puppies, and used car salesmen. Yes, there's something that they all have in common. So when I first showed you the picture of babies and puppies, I don't know if you noticed, there was a little, ah. You saw those pictures, the cute baby, the puppy, and you're saying to yourself, oh, they're so cute. Okay? And what happens there is that we respond to them, yes, they're cute, but it's also a matter of their vulnerability. Babies are inherently vulnerable. Puppies are vulnerable. And one of the things that triggers in us is a desire to care for them, a feeling of connection. Okay? We feel that bond with them. Now, you may not feel a bond with a used car salesman, but think about this. If you've ever tried to negotiate a deal for a car, and the car salesman said, no, I really shouldn't do this, and I'll get in trouble if you tell anybody, but I can throw the floor mats in for free. Okay, you know that's a lie. Okay, but why do they do it? Because they are faking vulnerability. They're faking the experience of, I'm going out on a limb for you. I'm putting myself at risk for you. And why would they do that? It's because the same thing happens when they show vulnerability that happens with the puppies and the babies. In your brain, there's a release of a neurotransmitter called oxytocin. Some people refer to oxytocin as the cuddle hormone. What it does is it floods your brain with chemicals that make you feel connected to the other person. It's why we bond with our children. It's why mother ducks bond with their ducklings. Okay? It's why you feel connected to your puppy. And it unfortunately is why you're more likely to sign the check to buy the car from the used car salesman. The curious thing about oxytocin is it not only gives you this sense of connection, but oxytocin is something you can't release in yourself. It has to be released by someone else. I can't sit here and say, I want to flood with oxytocin. It won't happen. However, if somebody shares something with me, if somebody's vulnerable, if somebody's open, it happens involuntarily. Okay? So relational trust is about that sense of connection. And what is it that engenders that sense of connection? It comes from authenticity, vulnerability, openness. Okay? So that's the first part of it. Now, we've got our aerialists here. What's your sense? Do they need a rush of oxytocin? Is oxytocin what it is that's going to cause the trust to occur between that flyer and that catcher? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think something else is at play here, and we're going to give you a chance, again, with that person sitting next to you, to have a very quick conversation. What I want you to do is think of someone that you trust. Okay, somebody you really trust. You do not have to name names. Okay, you can keep the person's identity secret. But think of someone you trust, and what I want you to do is spend just 15 seconds, each of you talking to the other one about why do you trust that person? What is it about that person that causes you to trust them? All right? 15 seconds. Go. Quick conversation. Okay, wrap up the conversation. Okay, I am curious. I want to see what you got here. So, who can volunteer? What's one of the reasons that you trust that person? Don't tell me about the person. I just want to know what are some of the reasons you trust them. Anybody want to volunteer? What's the reason you trust someone? Yes? Honesty. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about honesty. What is it that matters with honesty? What does honesty mean to you?
That the person always shares his ideas, even
Good.
if I like it or not.
Yep.
And he's stable even if I don't like it or not.
That's great. So they're going to be forthright in sharing what they're thinking, and you know that because you've experienced that over and over with that person. So I know that I can rely on that from them. Okay? Great. What else? What other reasons do we have that we trust people? Yes? A comfort level. And maybe that comfort level comes from the experience with them, but there may be some other aspects around that person that also give you the comfort level. For instance, it may be that I know that the person is really kind or capable, and so I know that I can rely on what they're going to be doing. Okay? Any other reasons that people have? Yes, in the back. Okay, somebody else hear what she said and repeat it for me? It was brilliant. I just can't hear it. Let me give you a couple of other ideas, and we can talk about this a little bit later on. So I'm going to share a little bit about what trust involves here. And I said before that it came in two different flavors. There was relational trust, which was about connection, and then there's transactional trust. And transactional trust is a willingness to put yourself or something that you value at risk based on another person's actions. It sounds kind of cold, doesn't it? But at its heart, that's what it means when we trust someone. It means I am willing to allow that person's actions to affect something that's important to me. Okay? A willingness to put yourself at risk. Now, where relational trust was all about connection, in transactional trust, there are three things that people point to that tend to be the reasons that they trust. I mentioned that I started studying trust about 15 years ago. And this was what the research that I did at the time showed. It said that the first is consistency, that reliability. The person keeps their promises. If they say they're going to do something, they do it. Okay, there's no say-do gap, if you will. Now, for how many of you is that consistency or reliability something that you would factor in if you're going to make the decision to trust someone? Quick show of hands. Seeing a fair number of hands going up. In the research that we did originally, we found that that was true in about 70% of cases. People looked at that. Now think about this. Let's say that you're going to your doctor. This is your general practitioner. You go to see your doctor, and if your doctor is giving you good advice over and over and over again, you're more likely to trust that doctor to continue giving you good advice. Okay? That consistency matters. Second, maybe capability. So I may trust you also because I know you're able to do something. I'm not taking a chance. You've got that. Now, I talked about your doctor. Let's say you now go to a specialist. I have no track record with that specialist. I've never been to that person's office before. But I'm going to trust that person to perform a procedure. Why would I do that? This is a stranger. Why? Because I look at the wall and I see those diplomas. And I understand that in order to be this kind of a doctor, they had to go through a lot of training. So there's a hurdle. I have a trust in their capability. That happens in about 50% of time. Yes, you can trust for more than one reason. The last is shared purpose. I'm more likely to trust you if I think that you and I are both pulling in the same direction. If I don't think you have a hidden agenda. If I don't think you're out for your own good and the heck with me. So that shared purpose, that alignment of purpose, is the other reason that people trust. In the case of the doctor we were talking about, if I think that my doctor really has my best interest at heart in saying that I need to diet and exercise more, maybe I'll do that because I think it's good advice. They care about me, and they care about me more than they do about billing for more tests. Okay? They're giving me good advice because that demonstrates that we're aligned in what they're trying to do, not just seeing me as a source of dollars. Shared purpose factors in about 60% of the time. Except in high-trust organizations. In high-trust organizations, shared purpose goes to 90%. What Duncan was talking about earlier in terms of the importance of purpose in aligning people, that's why it drives trust. Because we know we're on the same team, we're going in the same direction. When I started doing my research, one of the things that had happened back in the day was we were coming out of a financial crisis. It was the financial crisis in the late 2000s. And as it happened, the research that I was doing gave me a chance to look at data from both before the crisis and after the crisis. And what we found was that during the financial crisis, when businesses ran into really, really tough straits and people were downsizing and all of that, trust in organizations took a nosedive off a cliff. Not a big surprise. But as we were looking at that data, something interesting emerged as we were coming out of that. Because we could look at the trust that people had in organizations, but we could also drill in and say, well, how do you feel about your colleagues? Your trust in your colleagues versus your trust in your manager. Here's what we found out. With colleagues, when the crisis occurred initially, nobody trusted anybody because every man for himself. But trust returned with respect to colleagues much more quickly. Because in that situation, there was a clear sense of, okay, I understand why we were all kind of putting our heads down and trying not to get in the crosshairs and be the next person to be ushered out the door because they were downsizing. That made some sense to people. But what they also realized was, okay, but I know who you are, I know what you've done in the past, and we can work together again. And so trust came back for colleagues. It took significantly longer for trust to come back in managers. Because for the managers, what had happened before was we came into a tough situation, and what happened when the crisis happened? You stopped talking to me, you avoided looking at me, you started firing my friends, and all of that talk you had had about how important it was to develop me, well, that just went out the window. And so far more damage was done to the relationships of trust between managers and employees than was done between workers. So now what do you do about that? Because we've got a bit of a conundrum here, don't we? If I want to be able to restore trust after it's broken, I've got a problem if one of the reasons we trust is consistency and reliability, and I've just broken the track record. Okay? I've just demonstrated that I may not really be as reliable or consistent as I was. So I'm going to give you a suggestion about something you can do in that vein, and then something else to consider with respect to how you engage people and trust them to do things in your organization. So here's where we're going to go. One of the keys to being able to address broken trust or damaged trust is, from a consistency point of view, you want to increase the other person's expectation that you will follow through. Okay? You want to increase that expectation that you're going to follow through. And you do that by making sure that it's very clear what you're agreeing to. Because usually what happens is we talk notionally to somebody, and then things don't work out. And where you might have had high degree of trust previously, if things don't work out now, you don't look at it the same way. You're a little bit more skeptical. So what we want to suggest here is that there is a simple but powerful three-step process to build an agreement. First step in the process is you propose what it is that's going to happen. You're making the suggestion of what's going to happen. Now, oftentimes in organizations, that's where it stops. You get notional, and then you don't do anything else. If you're better than most, you'll actually check to see, do you agree? That's the agreement on the far side there. Okay? That either an affirmation or a negative pole. But the Zen Master black belt version of this has a middle step, which is you make sure that you both understand the agreement in the same way before you agree to it, so that you don't get a miscommunication. You don't end up both thinking you agree, but you were agreeing to two different things. And so you end up frustrating each other or disappointing each other. So you want to make that clear. Simple three-step process. By the way, every one of you has seen this process in action in a very memorable event. A wedding. Because weddings have all three elements. The first element, the propose element, is not somebody on their knee with a ring. That's not it. It comes after that. The propose element is, do you, Chris, take Pat, and do you, Pat, take Chris? That's the proposal. Before we get to the agreement, we make sure that we are clear on the terms. You know what that is? Anybody know? For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and health, forsaking all others, till death do you part. It says this is not a date. This is a whole lot more serious than that. So we make sure that before we check whether these two are going to agree, they understand, what are you agreeing to? Then we check for agreement, but we check for agreement two different ways. The first thing we do, which we refer to here as a negative pole, has nothing to do with the two people who are getting married. We ask everybody else, if anyone here knows just cause why these two should not get married, speak now or hold your peace. We ask for, are there any objections? That, by the way, is a very subtle way of gaining agreement. You are not asking everybody in that room whether they think these two should get married. I don't know about you, but at my wedding, I'm not so sure my in-laws would have agreed. Okay? So we're not asking their permission. What we're just saying is, anybody got an objection? That's all the agreement I need. So long as nobody says no, I'm fine. Then we go to Pat and Chris. And we ask Pat and Chris, do you agree? And that's when we get the I do. Okay? Now, the last thing I said I was going to mention to you is, now that we've talked about agreement building, what's the implication for us in terms of how trust plays out in our work? I'm curious, how many of you have ever taken a class or been trained in how to delegate? How to work with other people? Seeing a few hands up there, or given some guidance at some point. Let me put it another way. Is there anybody in this room, and you got to put your hand up if you're here, anybody in this room who does not know how to delegate? Doesn't know how to delegate? Okay, so everybody here knows how to delegate. The curious thing is we don't always do it. We don't always do it. And it has a lot to do with trust. I want to tell you a very quick story as wrapping this up. In one of the first senior leader roles that I had, I was having a meeting with my boss, and my boss said, "Andy, I am so glad that I hired you. You are really bright. You are really, really capable. And by the way, you're screwing up. So, well, that wasn't what I expected. What's going on? She said, you can do amazing things. The problem is, I have you in a role where you need to guide and delegate to others, not just what you can do yourself. Okay? I need what you can do with other people and through other people, not just what you can deliver. And then she said to me, I need you and I pay you to be smarter than your own brain. Which for me was pretty memorable. Because what she was saying was, I need you to be able to bring out the best in other people by being able to share the work, delegating with others, and helping them come along. Now, what is it that gets in the way of delegation? Well, what hinders delegation tends to be a couple of reasons. So there are really good reasons we do it, and they are really well-intentioned. The first of those reasons is integrity. We have super high standards for the work, and we want to make sure it gets done right. So the downside of this is we keep doing it ourselves, and we don't trust other people. And part of the consequence of that is, remember I talked about consistency, capability, and shared purpose? If you don't give other people the opportunity, they never build the capability. And so you're going to have to keep doing the same thing over and over again because you'll never build the ability for them to do it. The second is concern. We don't want to overburden others who are also busy. Well-intended, bad idea. Because what that does very often is it removes those opportunities. We keep saying, oh, I can't put that on that person's plate, as opposed to figuring out, actually, this is more important for that person to do than what they're doing right now. Let's talk about how we're going to rebalance that. Well-intentioned, bad outcome. So what do you do about it? I'm going to give you just a couple of suggestions, and then we'll wrap up. So what helps? The first is, if you're going to delegate, set the context. Give the other person the big picture. Why is that important? Remember we talked about shared purpose? The big picture makes sure that that person understands what's the larger thing we're trying to do here. What is it that we want as the set of outcomes? What are we trying to achieve? Because by doing that, you enable that person to take independent action. If you don't give them the context and just give them the task to do, if they run into a roadblock, they have to come back to you. If you give them the context, they can get creative and learn on their own how to get there. So context is key. Second, establish constraints. If there are some things that are off limits, tell them that. If there are some things that need to be part of the answer, tell them that. That's fine, because that's going to increase the reliability of the execution. Third is delegate, but coach. Look at these as opportunities to build the capability of your people. If you build capability, you increase the likelihood that you're going to trust them. And then finally, communicate regularly. Make sure you stay on the same page. So 3 quick takeaways. First is that authenticity and vulnerability, those help build relational trust. Second is that consistency and transparency build transactional trust. And then finally, delegation truly hinges on trust. And with that, thank you very much for your attention, for playing along, and hope you found that interesting.